Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
This one small decision that I made to step in and become big brother for this kid has, just had endless ripples of benefits for me and has enriched my life and enriched my daughter's life. And, long after I'm gone, they're going to have this really wonderful relationship. We extended our family. We were lucky to have 2 girls, but then to have an extra, like a bonus kid, and such a wonderful one. I talk to him every day. We work out together at the gym almost, weekly. And my daughters have their own independent relationships with him. And now with his wife, my little girl, my 14-year-old daughter, just adores Jeffrey's wife. And they're developing their own friendship. They go out for tea together, just the 2 of them. And how beautiful is that? We've created all these new waves of love.
That's our guest this week, best-selling author Jonathan Eig, who became a mentor, big brother, and eventually father figure to Jeffrey. It's a heartwarming story, and we'll hear it this week. We'll also learn about Jonathan Eig's numerous best-selling books about Lou Gehrig, Jackie Robinson, and Martin Luther King, to name a few. Jonathan Eig is a funny and fascinating guy, and we'll hear his story this week on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Now, say hello to the founder of the Special Fathers Network and host of the Dad to Dad podcast, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network, a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. The Special Fathers Network Mastermind Group experience is the most comprehensive program the 21st Century Dads Foundation offers. Dads raising children with special needs meet virtually on a weekly basis and form meaningful relationships while sharing weekly wins, discussing books, and sharing heartfelt challenges. One of the highlights of the year is attending an in-person weekend retreat. We're launching 10 new mastermind groups in 2024 with 10 dads per group. That means we're only looking for 10 like-minded dads in each community. If you're a dad raising a child with special needs, we hope you'll join a local mastermind group and make the investment to become the best version of yourself. For more information, please see the show notes or simply go to 21stcenturydads.org.
Now let's hear this incredible conversation between Jonathan Eig and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with my friend Jonathan Eig of Chicago, who's the father of 3, a journalist and best-selling author, including biographies on Martin Luther King Jr., Muhammad Ali, Jackie Robinson, and Lou Gehrig, as well as a series of children's books. John, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thanks, David. Great to talk to you.
You and your wife, Jennifer, have been married for 27 years and are the proud parents of 2 daughters, Lillian, 20, and Lola, 14, as well as Jeffrey, 33, who you mentored from his age 7 through Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and then formally became his legal guardian until his age 18. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
I grew up in Muncie, New York, born in Brooklyn, moved out to the suburbs when I was 3. My dad was an accountant working out of the basement of our house most of the time, taking care of small businesses in the community. My mom was a housewife, a very active PTA mom, and later went on to become a state officer in the PTA and active running a nonprofit program in the schools that taught parenting classes, actually. So when I was in high school, my mom was hanging around the halls teaching parenting classes to teen parents at the school because, we had some kids who became parents while they were still in high school. And there was my mom, so I guess the expectations were high since the person teaching the parenting classes was my parent. But I grew up with 2 brothers and I was a very lucky kid.
Well, thanks for mentioning that about your mom. She was ahead of her time. She was working with teen parents. That's what I heard you saying.
Yeah, right.
That's a woman after my heart because I do have a big heart for these super young dads, who become fathers inadvertently, right? In most cases, they weren't planning to become fathers.
Right.
And they're not even mature. The male brain is alleged to, be fully formed at age 25. And we're talking about teenagers, people in high school.
Yeah, I don't think mine is fully formed yet, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Okay. So you mentioned your dad is a retired accountant, and I'm sort of wondering, how would you characterize your relationship with your dad?
Well, my dad was home every day because he worked out of the basement, or more often from the kitchen table, because he didn't like being alone in the basement. I was really unusual in that respect. I was probably the only kid in the neighborhood whose dad was home every day, who came to every Little League game, every band concert, every tennis match when I was on the high school tennis team. He was always around, always warm and loving, just a sweet guy. He would be out to play catch in the backyard when he was bored and didn't feel like working anymore. So that was unusual. Now, there are a lot of stay-at-home working parents, but back then it was pretty unusual.
Yeah, well, I can identify with your dad. I thought I wanted to be a Big 8 public accounting partner when I graduated from college, and it took me 4 years of college accounting and 3 years of working in Big 8 public accounting to realize, maybe that's not me. But I did prioritize being present, and that's what I heard you talking about with your dad. He was present, more so than most dads.
Yeah, and just to tell you a little story, when I was born April 26th, and my dad's an accountant. He was working at that point for a big firm in New York. I was born on a Sunday. My dad called and said, I'm not coming into work on Monday because my wife just gave birth. They were still busy doing the taxes, especially, I guess, the late filings and the extensions. And they said, well, you can't take the day off. We've got a lot of work here. If you don't come in today, you're fired. And my dad didn't go into work. He left his job as, a new parent with a new home and a lot of financial concerns. He just quit his job, and he never went back to working in the city again. He just decided he was going to try to make it on his own as a solo operator.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful story. You're the firstborn of your brothers, right?
Yep.
What more conviction could you share with somebody than somebody who's willing to quit their job to prioritize their family?
Yeah, talk about an early lesson. That's the lesson I got on the day one, literally day one on the planet for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. So any other important takeaways when you think about your relationship with your dad, a lesson learned or something you've tried to incorporate into your own fathering behalf?
I mentioned that my dad was unusual in that he worked from home. He was also unusual in that he's just like a puppy dog in terms of showing his emotions. And I think most of the men of his generation were not that way. They were taught to be stoic and to not show their feelings. And my dad was just, and still is, thank God, he's 85. He's just a big gob of emotions, and he wears his heart on his sleeve, and doesn't always know how to express himself, but the feelings are right there for you to see. And that was always a real gift. You knew where you stood with him. If he was mad at you, if he was proud of you, it was all right out there to see.
So is that something you've taken away that you've tried to incorporate or not?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a very emotional guy. I'm a very sentimental guy. I'm sensitive. I don't feel like I have to prove anything by being tough or like showing no feelings. I think I get that from my dad for sure.
Excellent. So I'm thinking about other father influencers, and I'm wondering what role, if any, your grandfathers played first on your dad's side.
My dad's dad died when I was 5 years old in a hit and run car accident.
Oh my God.
I remember him. I remember playing with him on the rug, and I remember when he died, but I didn't have a relationship beyond that. And then my mom's grandfather was a foreman in a bra factory, and they moved to Puerto Rico when I was little so he could continue working in the factory after the factory was sent overseas. So I didn't see him that much. And then he started suffering from Alzheimer's pretty early. So my main memory of him is shooting baskets in the front yard on our basketball court, and he insisted that foul shots were meant to be shot underhanded, and that was the only way to do it. And I'm still pretty good at shooting those underhanded foul shots.
Well, I guess the good news is you do have a firsthand recollection of both your grandfathers.
Yeah.
Even though one died very prematurely with this sad hit and run situation. I can't even imagine, right? He probably wouldn't have been much more than 50 or 60 years old.
That's right. He was in his 50s.
Yeah. Any other father figures, men who might have played an influential role in your life, either as a young guy or perhaps as a young adult?
Let me think. I've had some great teachers. My high school tennis coach was a really important figure in my life just because he was this insane disciplinarian. I really came to respect him, and I think he shapes a lot of my attitudes about work to this day. I quote him all the time to my kids, like Coach Moncall would say, get your ass out of that chair and go get it yourself. Like he was a real inspiration for me. because I was not a good tennis player, but I worked harder than anybody else on the team, I think. And that's what it took to please him.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It reminds me of a baseball coach I had in high school. This guy was a ball buster. Kirby Smith was his name. Is his name. He's still alive. And he was very disciplined. I'm telling you, he was used to coaching at the college level, and he was like back in high school. And he held us to a very high standard. And even to this day, I always double knot my shoes if I have lace-up shoes. And it's a direct result of being on one of his teams. He said, if we ever have to stop the game because you have to tie your shoes, you're out of the game.
I love it.
So my recollection was that you took a BS in journalism from Northwestern University. And I'm wondering, where did your career take you? Where did you think your career was going to take you?
Well, from the time I was 16, I went to work at my hometown paper in Rockland, New York. And I just wanted to be a newspaper reporter from that moment on. I loved it. I just loved having a notebook and being able to pull up at a crime scene or knock on someone's door and ask for an interview. I was a shy kid, so the notebook was my key, my passport to the world, and I liked writing. So I just thought I'd be a newspaper reporter forever. That's really all I ever wanted to do. And I thought, what could be more stable than a newspaper career? The newspapers aren't going anywhere. That's for sure. And it worked out pretty well for the first 10 years or so. And then the newspaper industry started to really shrink up. But I was lucky in that I made the transition to writing books. That was not part of any plan. It just happened. And it's been a great ride because I'm still basically doing the same thing. I'm just taking my notebook out and doing interviews and writing stories, just a much longer format now.
So how does a young guy like yourself get his first journalism job down in New Orleans?
Well, like I said, I started when I was 16 at my hometown paper as a clerk, just basically taking out the trash or typing up stories that other reporters called in or whatever they wanted me to do. And then I went to journalism school at Northwestern. I got some internships in the summers. And when I graduated, I just applied for jobs and got a job at the New Orleans Times Picayune in one of the suburban bureaus. Back then, again, newspapers were booming. They had more money than they knew what to do with. They were opening, bureaus in every suburb so that they could sell subscriptions to, really every house on every block. It was easy to get a job. The only question was, could I get to the New York Times or could I get to the Washington Post? But you figure, you put in a few years first in New Orleans, you move up to a bigger paper, and maybe in, my goal was, in 4 or 5 years to get to a bigger paper. But I went from New Orleans, worked there for 3.5 years to the Dallas Morning News. And then I met my wife and moved to Chicago and gave up the dream of making it to the New York Times because I was just going to follow her to Chicago. I didn't quite give up on the New York Times, but once I got landed in Chicago, I was happy here.
Well, you went to work for Chicago Magazine and then ultimately the Wall Street Journal, which is not like a second-tier paper by any stretch.
No, it was a great paper, and it still is a great paper, but I got there, started working for the Journal in 2000, and the paper was still booming and so thick. I mean, it was like a phone book that had so many ad pages back then. I remember the editor saying to me once, we're having a hard time spending our budget. We have too much money, and if I don't spend it all, they won't give me more next year. So those are the glory days, really, the last of the glory days of print journalism in America.
Gotcha. You also had a little bit of a stint teaching, haven't you?
A little bit. I've taught here and there. I've taught 1 or 2 classes at Northwestern and Columbia College in Chicago, and then I guest lecture. I still do that almost every semester at Northwestern.
And what is it that you talk about there?
Writing, mostly, reporting, creativity, how to come up with story ideas. I just, I enjoy talking to the young journalists. It's especially today. If you want to be a journalist today, you have to really want it badly. So it's exciting to see that enthusiasm.
Yeah, well, your point earlier was that the field of journalism has changed dramatically, right? There used to be all these papers, all these outlets, and it was easier to find a job then, perhaps, than it is today. But while there might not be newspapers, there's still a lot of ways that people are consuming their information. So it's not like journalism jobs have gone away entirely. It's just a totally different way of approaching that, right?
Yeah, no question. We still need great reporters. We still need great storytellers. It's just harder to reach audiences, and it's harder to reach broad audiences. You can write for your niche audience, and if you're a conservative, you can find a conservative audience. If you're a liberal, you find a liberal audience. But back then, newspapers reached the whole community, and that's rare today. I think it's just a little harder for young journalists to get a foothold in the business, but not impossible. You know, if my kid wanted to be a journalist today, I would be nervous about their career opportunities, but I certainly wouldn't discourage them because I think it's really important work.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. So you mentioned that you moved to Chicago because of your relationship with Jennifer. I'm sort of curious to know, how did you meet?
Well, she was a journalist too, and she's 6 years younger than I am. We both went to Northwestern, but we didn't meet in college. And then a friend of mine who was working with her said, "Oh, you'd really like this girl, and you're interested in a lot of the same kinds of stories that you're writing about. You should at least talk like professionally." But I think, you know, it's more than professional. I think you guys would really make a great couple. And I've resisted for a long time because Jen was in Charlotte and I was in Dallas. Like, who needs a long distance relationship? But finally, I just agreed to call her and talk on the phone, and we really hit it off. So we chatted on the phone for a couple of months and then met in person. And then she moved to Chicago, and we dated long distance for about a year. And then I quit my job and moved up to Chicago to see if we could make it work. And we've been making it work for 27 years now.
And the rest is history. Okay, well, thanks for sharing. So you don't have any direct connection to the world of special needs, but you do have a unique relationship with this now young man, Jeffrey, so which predates being married and becoming a biological father yourself. So what's the backstory on Jeffrey and how did you meet?
When I moved to Chicago, I had a friend here named Craig who was in the Big Brother program. And Craig was moving to Seattle and asked me if I would take over for him in the Big Brother program. Because I had been a Big Brother twice before in New Orleans and in Dallas, so I knew how much work it was, and also that like enrolling was a process. I just said, "I'm fine, but I'll do it, but I'm not doing the paperwork." So I took over. I went to meet Jeffrey. He was 7 years old at the time. So I just stepped in for Craig and started visiting Jeffrey every week and taking him to the ballpark, taking him to see Cubs games, taking him to play catch, shoot baskets, helping him with his homework. You know, I'd see him once a week. You know, again, as I said, he was 7. Jen and I were still dating, or we had just gotten married. And then just kept that going until he was 14. And then his mom passed away. And he had no other family and no place else to go. So at 14, Jen and I became his guardians. He moved in with us. He moved in first when his mom got sick, stayed with us for about 6 months. And then when she passed away, we decided that we should keep him around. And at that point, we had a baby. You know, we had just had a baby around that same year. So now we went from having a 6-month-old to having a 6-month-old and a 14-year-old, which is pretty weird. Not always a happy situation, but we got through the hard times. It was definitely tough. I'm laughing about it now, but those first couple of years were really hard.
Yeah, well, what most impresses me about what you've shared, and I think it speaks to your character, is that you didn't just open your home, but you opened your heart to this young man. And it wasn't like, overnight. Like you said, you met him when he was 7 and you became his guardian at age 14. So 7 years worth of experience before that formal relationship had occurred. And when you look back on those first 7 years, I'm wondering, what was it that sort of kept you engaged or involved like you have been?
That's a good question. Even at age 7, and Jeffrey was a mess. He cried a lot. He's this really overweight, lonely kid, single mom, living in poverty. He had a heart of gold. You could tell it at age 7. He was just such a sweet, loving kid. He had this nasty cat that he'd found on the street. That cat, his name was Lucky, hated everybody except Jeffrey. And Jeffrey just gave his love to this cat, and no matter how bad the world treated him, no matter how often his mom was evicted, the kids at school calling him names because he was obese and because he owned like one pair of pants and he smelled bad, no matter how bad the world treated him, Jeffrey just loved everybody. I mean, you just couldn't turn your back on a kid like that.
Were there some important decisions you made along the way, helping raise a young boy like this?
Well, the hardest part was when he moved in. I went from being his pal, his once-a-week pal, to having to be a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And the friendship kind of ended. And that was hard because I had to discipline him now when he screwed up. I had to ground him. And Jen, too, we had to, check his homework every night, and he was failing all of his classes, and we had to make him stay in and study, and we hired tutors, and I can still remember he would go out in the back alley behind our house and throw the baseball at the brick wall. He has a rocket for an arm, and I really swore he was going to put a hole in that brick wall. He was so angry at the whole world, and I knew that I should go down there and play catch with him, and I did sometimes, but not all the time, because we were mad at each other, and we were mad at the world that took his mom, and I was having to be this disciplinarian now, and our friendship was suffering for it. Those were some hard times, and sometimes we'd yell at each other. I can remember times where we were like chest to chest, and he was getting to be bigger than me. By the time he was like 15, we'd be chest to chest, and he'd say, "You're not my father," and I'd say, "Damn right, I'm not your father, but I'm going to tell you what you have to do anyway." And it was rough. We laugh about it now, but it was not pretty,
Was there a turning point?
Just time, just time. He knew we loved him. And I think that having a little baby girl in the house helped, because that diffused a lot of the tension. My Lillian would just crawl up in his lap and come into his bed and wake him in the morning. And that really took a lot of the tension out of it. He knew that I loved him. He had a 7-year track record, but it just took time.
So what impact has Jeffrey's situation had on your girls, your marriage, or your extended family for that matter?
Oh, man, I could write a book. It's there's a lot there. I mean, my daughters love him. I mean, when they were little and they would say, my big brother is 18 or my big brother is 20, and the friends on the playground wouldn't believe him. You don't have a 20-year-old brother. You're making him up. And then he'd show up, and he's this giant with the muscles on top of muscles, and they'd be like, "Oh my God!" And he'd be like, "Hello, girls," he's like Dwayne Johnson on the playground when he shows up with his his tank top. But they just adore him because it's an unusual relationship. They never had to compete with him for attention. And he has a car, and he can take them out to dinner, and he's got a credit card. So he's like a super brother.
Almost like an uncle.
Yeah, kind of, right. That's a good analogy. And, it was a test for Jen and me to take him in, and we didn't always agree on how to handle things. So I think we felt like stronger as parents for having gone through this together and figured it out. Our parents weren't always excited about having this person in our house. Like, who is this interloper who's, it was weird at times, but I think we just felt like stronger as a couple for having had this thing drop in our lap, and we handled it. We did the right thing, and we feel like we're richer for it. Like our family's richer for it.
That's fabulous. So what's Jeffrey doing now?
He just got married, and we love his wife, and he just became a chiropractor. So this kid who barely graduated high school, who never read a book, who basically charmed his way through Elmhurst College without ever cracking a book, meets this girl, and the girl says, "I think you can do better than working as a personal trainer." And he says, "Fine, I'll become a chiropractor." And he did. And then they ended up getting married, and it's amazing. He's just passed his last licensing exam, and he's starting to practice as a chiropractor right now.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. It must be like a unexpected dividend, special dividend, to use an investment analogy, when you look back and reflect on this relationship over the last, 26 years now, right?
Yeah, I think about it that way a lot. I feel like this one small decision that I made to step in and become big brother for this kid has, just had endless ripples of benefits for me, and has enriched my life and enriched my daughter's life. And long after I'm gone, they're going to have this really wonderful relationship. We extended our family. We were lucky to have 2 girls, but then to have an extra, like a bonus kid, and such a wonderful one. I talk to him every day. We work out together at the gym almost, weekly. And my daughters have their own independent relationships with him. And now with his wife, my little girl, my 14-year-old daughter, just adores Jeffrey's wife. And they're developing their own friendship. They go out for tea together, just the 2 of them. And how beautiful is that? We've created all these new waves of love.
Yeah, I love it. And just reflecting on this, had Jeffrey not been in your family, you would have been a minority in a sorority.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I like I like being around all the girls. That's no problem. But it was nice sometimes to have a guy in the house who would talk sports and lift weights with me. I do enjoy that.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about you being self-employed as an author. And under the banner of full disclosure, I've read each of your 6 books as they came out. I know the buzz is about the King of Life, the MLK book that came out earlier this year. But I think it would be helpful for our listeners if we talked briefly about each book in chronological order. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure. Got all day?
So I don't recall exactly how we met, but I'm going to guess it had to do with the publication of your first book, Luckiest Man, The Life and Death of Lou-Gehrig, which came out in 2005. So it was your first book, and I'm sort of curious to know, how'd you pick your subject matter and why Lou-Gehrig?
It was a pretty spontaneous decision. You know, I've been a journalist and a writer for a long time, and I was reading Seabiscuit when it first came out. And I thought, man, what a great book. I wonder if I could write a book like this. The key is that it's about a sports hero, but it's not really about sports. It's about characters. It's about underdogs. It's about hardship. I was having this discussion with Jen over dinner. I said, what I need is a sports story that's about something much bigger than sports, like Lou Gehrig. Just like that, it just popped into my head. The Lou Gehrig story is really about dealing with tragedy. It's about finding out that you're facing a fatal illness when you're in your mid-30s. Everybody can relate to that. Everybody's lost somebody before their time. I wonder how Gehrig dealt with it. I wonder how he handled it when he found out he was ill. I wonder how that affected his family. The baseball is just a little part of the story. It's a really human story about the tragedy of dying young. And I just thought, I could write that book. I think I could figure out how to write it. I'd never written a book, but I think I could figure out how to do that. And I started. The moral of the story really is I gave myself permission to do it. Like, I didn't say, well, I'm not a sports writer, or I'm not a biographer, or I don't have a book agent. Like, I just thought, it's a really good idea. I should do it, and I'm going to try. And if somebody tells me I can't do it, all right, I guess I'll stop. But until then, I'm going to just try. And that was the key. If I hadn't made that decision to just try and see what happened, then I don't know, my career would have gone a very different path.
What was the reaction when the book came out?
It was really amazing, and I'm really lucky because I didn't know that how important it is for your first book to sell well. But because I had lots of new information, I found letters that Gehrig wrote as he was dying. So there was a lot of new material in this book. It really showed him in an important new light. Yankee fans lined up to buy it. People with ALS or people who had family members who had suffered from ALS were interested in it. It got good reviews, and it sold really well. It made the bestseller list. And I remember my agent calling me and saying, you've got it now. You're established. Like, you can do more books. You can keep doing this if you want to. And he was really excited because I guess, that doesn't happen. Most people, if they're lucky enough to write a book, it's rare to have that kind of commercial success, especially on your first one. So I was very lucky.
I'm going to call you the second luckiest man in the world then.
Yeah, right.
Behind your subject matter. Okay, well, let's go to book number 2, which came out in 2007, Opening Day, the story of Jackie Robinson's first season. Another baseball book. So you're a baseball guy.
Right, because the book sold well and because I enjoy doing it so much, my editor really encouraged me to do another baseball book. And I said, I don't want to do a baseball book unless it's about something bigger than baseball. It has to be about something more. And I thought, what's the biggest, most important story in all of baseball? It's Jackie Robinson. I think he's the most important player in baseball history because he changed the nation. There was already a pretty good Jackie Robinson biography out there. But I thought if I just focused on his first season, I could really capture his importance in a way that makes for a much more compelling story. You don't have to read the whole life. You can just get a sense for how he changed the country in the moment. So I wrote about his rookie season.
Was Carl Erskine part of that? Do you remember?
Yeah, he's one of the guys I interviewed.
You know, he's still alive.
Yeah, he's the last of the Dodgers of that era who's still alive, I think.
Yeah, he has a young son by the name of Jimmy. Actually, sadly, Jimmy just passed away earlier this year. He had Down syndrome. And for different reasons, you know, Jackie changed the face of baseball, literally. And Carl Erskine, you know, sort of alongside him as one of his closest friends, also changed the way that people think about disability. And I think that there was this compassion all around with both those individuals, bigger than life people.
Yeah, and Robinson, I didn't get into this too much because the book was only about 1947, but you know he had a son, a veteran, and who suffered from substance abuse problems, and that deeply affected Robinson's life. He lost his son in a car accident at a very early age, and I think Robinson never really recovered from that himself.
So the third book, you went in a completely different direction, and the title of which came out in 2010 is Get Capone, the Secret Plot That Captured America's Most Wanted Gangster. How in the world did you come up with writing about Al Capone?
Well, I didn't want to do another baseball book because then I'd be a sports guy and I would never be able to break out of that. So I'm, living in Chicago, and Capone is everywhere here. We're still obsessed with him. And I began thinking, who's the real hero of the Capone story? It's not Eliot Ness. It's the lawyers. It's the government officials who went after him. And I was lucky to find the papers of the man who prosecuted Capone, thousands of pages of his papers, including, wiretaps of the Capone gang and all this really cool stuff that had never been used before by writers. I wanted to tell the real story of Capone. It's really my only book that's not about heroes. So it's definitely the odd duck in my row of books.
So the fourth book, which came out a few years later, was 2014, The Birth of the Pill, How Four Crusaders Reinvented Sex and Launched a Revolution. Way different from the first three books.
Yeah. My wife was urging me to write a book for women because women buy more books than men. So she's very practical. I heard my rabbi give a sermon about the power of man to change the world, man and women to change the world. And he said that he thought the birth control pill might be the most important invention of the 20th century. And I realized I had no idea how it was invented or who invented it. And when I looked into it, the story was just amazing because, birth control was illegal in 30 states. And they couldn't get any government support, any university support. The inventors were these radicals who were, doing it underground. And it's just a tremendous story of underdogs trying to change the world and succeeding.
Yeah, well, it certainly has revolutionized not only things here in the U.S., but around the world. So let's switch to talking about Ali, A Life, that came out in 2017. And Ali died in 2016, June of 2016. And did you have a chance to meet him before he passed away?
Yeah, I met him briefly. I tried to get interviews with him, and he couldn't do interviews anymore. He was suffering from Parkinson's and from dementia, and he hadn't done an interview in 10 or 15 years. But I went to his house and got to meet him, and I told him I was writing this book and that I would love to talk to him. And when I got done meeting him, his wife said, Muhammad wants you to come back and read him the book as soon as you finish writing it. And I said I would love to, but he passed away before I finished, so I did not get the chance to read him the book. I don't know if I could have done it. I would have been too nervous, I think, to read the whole thing to him.
Well, it's a big book.
Yeah, it would have taken a while, and I'd be nervous about the parts he wouldn't like because there were some things in there that he probably didn't want to hear. And even at the age of 70 something with Parkinson's, he probably still could have kicked my butt.
Was there a person that played an influential role in writing the book on Ali?
Oh, there were many people. I mean, I interviewed all three of his living wives. His first wife had passed away, and they were incredibly important to helping me understand Ali. And they were very generous in sharing their time and their memories. I get to meet Ali's brother and spend quite a bit of time with him, hearing about how Ali grew up and what his childhood was like. So the beauty of that book was that there were so many people, hundreds of people around who knew Ali well, and I interviewed all of them. Usually I'm writing about people who are much older, Ali, like Gehrig and Capone and even Martin Luther King. With King, I interviewed probably a couple hundred people. But with Ali, I think I interviewed 500 or 600 people. It was just amazing to be able to spend that much time with people who knew him well.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It was an amazing book as well. So let's talk about the most recent book, which came out earlier this year, entitled King, A Life, about Martin Luther King Jr. Fairly audacious undertaking, really. Dozens of books on MLK, a lot of material already out there. Where does one start embarking on such a project?
Well, I had the idea that we have really lost sight of King as a person, as a leader. We've turned him into a holiday and a monument and this very sort of stick figure approach to him. We talk about I have a dream and that's all anybody knows. I wanted to write a book that made him more human, that reminded us that he was flesh and blood, that he had failures, that he had doubts, that he had struggles with his own mental health. So I began just by interviewing people who knew him. I realized that the time was running short for that really this was the last opportunity to write a book that had access to the people who knew King, people who knew him really well, like Andrew Young and Harry Belafonte and John Lewis, but also neighbors, kids he grew up with, his barber. So I just covered the whole country. Before COVID hit, I went and interviewed everybody I could who knew King. And then when COVID hit, I just kept interviewing them over the phone. And I felt like, what a privilege. This is a man who will be remembered for hundreds of years, somebody who's as important as, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln to this country's history. And I had the chance to interview his friends and his family. Like, what an unbelievable privilege.
Well, I remember it was back in, I think, 2015, if I remember. I think I introduced you to John Bellamy with the idea that he might be a good stepping stone to Dick Gregory. And I'm wondering, was that a lead that led to anything or not necessarily?
Yeah, no, Gregory was one of my favorite interviews. I'll never forget, he said to me, what's the difference between Martin Luther King and Jesus? And I thought, is this a joke? He's a comedian, right? So I just said, I don't know. What's the difference between Martin Luther King and Jesus? And he said, videotape. We've got videotape of Martin Luther King. And I thought, that is important. That is absolutely right. And it's important to remember that we have documentary evidence and we have better than videotape. We have people who knew him. So that kind of fueled my mission.
Any surprises along the way, as you were interviewing these hundreds and hundreds of people?
Oh, so many surprises. They knew King and they wanted me to understand what it was like to be around him. What's it like to be in the room? What did he, I remember I asked his lawyer friend, Fred Gray, what did King smell like? And he said, are you kidding me? Like, who asks that? What did he smell like? I said, yeah, I want you to think about it. What did he smell like? He said, I have no idea what he smelled like. He was Martin Luther King. I said, come on, think about it. And he thought about it for a while. He said, cigarettes. He smoked, smelled like cigarettes. But okay, so that's good. But the big surprises were just to hear how he was just a guy. He was struggling. He had doubts. He really thought that, like, after a while, nobody was listening to him anymore. How sad is that Martin Luther King felt that people were getting tired of hearing him and that his message wasn't getting through anymore. It's a great reminder to all of us that he didn't give up. He never abandoned what he believed in. He could have compromised. He could have said, I'm just going to go teach for a while. This activism stuff is too hard. I'll let the younger cats take over from here. I'm just going to go teach at Harvard. Nah, he was right out on the front lines all the way to the very end. Where was he when he died? He was in Memphis for a sanitation workers strike. He did not have to be there. His own people were telling him it's not that important. They don't need you. You got bigger things to worry about. No way, man. He's on the front lines for the working poor who needed his help.
Yeah, well, I think one of the takeaways that I got from the book was the emphasis on the fact that he was Reverend Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And you were talking about faith. You didn't mention the word faith, but I think that's what came to mind, which is questioning or doubting himself. And I think what he was able to rely on, this is, again, my takeaway from your writing, was his faith, his deep faith in the purpose of the calling that he had.
Absolutely right. And I say this all the time, that when people ask me what made it possible for him to do what he did, I say Jesus, his religion, his faith in God, that made it essential, made it necessary for him to do this. So that's why he couldn't take an easy route, couldn't take the exit ramp, because he believed in what the Bible has to say about our responsibilities to one another. And he took that really seriously.
It's not lost on me that you're a Jewish white guy writing about one of the most influential Black Americans in our history. I'm wondering what challenges, if any, did that impose?
Well, I'm a white Jewish guy writing about the most influential Black Christian and arguably the most influential Black Muslim in this country. And I think it just requires more work, more modesty, more humility. I approach these subjects knowing that I have to work harder to earn the right to tell these stories. And that doesn't mean I'm the only one. We should have Black biographers writing these stories too. But this is taking my shot at it. And I just have to really work hard. And I that's why I sought the support and the help of all of these other people who knew King, as well as Black historians and Black writers. I went to them and said, will you help me do this? And I think that made it possible for me to overcome my insecurities and my doubts. But, it's a leap of faith to write anyone else's life story. If I were to write your life story or my brother's life story or lou-gehrig's life story, right? What gives me the right? I don't really know what goes on inside your mind or my brother's mind or lou-gehrig's mind. I'm just going to have to work hard enough to try to tell an accurate, honest story to the best of my abilities.
Yeah, well, to that point, at the end of the book, there was a bonus interview with Lerone A. Martin, the MLK Centennial Professor at Stanford University and one of the most well-respected MLK experts in our country. And what a flattering conversation that was, the back and forth that the two of you had, because my takeaway was that he had the utmost respect for the work that you've done, especially uncovering a lot of things that had not been previously disclosed. There's so many tapes. There's so much information that's being released.
But I dug up a lot of new stuff that other scholars hadn't come up with, in part just because some time had gone by between my book and the one before it, decades had gone by. So there was a lot of new material. And I think that helped to reintroduce King, to show people, that there was a lot out there they didn't know.
Yeah, well, it's a must read. I just was taken by it. And I actually listened to the book on Audible. And I thought that the narrator did a fabulous job.
Yeah, Dion Graham is phenomenal. I haven't listened to it because I can't stand listening to my own words, but everybody tells me they love it. And I've listened to little bits of it here and there just to get a taste, and I think he's superb.
Yep. So not as well known is that you've also authored 4 children's books under what I would refer to as the Lola Jones book series, and the titles of which are Some Pigtails, Score for Imagination, The DOG, and Everybody's Home. What's the backstory on these children's books?
The backstory is when my daughter, Lola Eig, was 6 years old or something like that. She went through a phase where she wanted pigtails every day. And since I'm the one who gets up early in the morning to get the kids out of school, because my wife has a real job, I was the one assigned to make pigtails. And I joked about it with her one day because we were reading Charlotte's Web. I said, hey, these are some pig tails. You get it? Some pig, like Charlotte's Web, some pigtails. Dad joke there. And then when she was at school that day, I thought, hey, I'm going to try to write a story called Some Pigtails. Let's just see what happens. And I'll show it to Lola when she gets home. And I wrote something and I thought, it's kind of like, could be the first chapter of a children's book. I made it about a grumpy old man who doesn't like making pigtails for his granddaughter, but does it anyway. And I just had fun. I just had fun writing it. And every day she'd come home and she'd read she wanted to know what happened next in the story. So I ended up writing the whole book, and then she made notes and gave me suggestions. And I found a little local publisher that wanted to publish it, and then they wanted more. So I wrote 4 of them, and they didn't sell at all. But I love these stories. And because it was something of a partnership with my daughter, I'm super proud of them.
That's fabulous. So any books that you started and never completed?
No, there's been books that I've researched that I thought I might want to write about something, and then I gave up on it because it just didn't feel right. I've written a couple novels, like big adult novels, that I've never shown anybody, that are stick in my desk drawer someday, that I'll probably have shredded so that nobody finds them. No, when it comes to the real work, I've been lucky that I've managed to publish everything that I've really written.
So what role, if any, has spirituality played on your journey?
I think it's a hugely important factor for me. I feel like I have a responsibility to do the right thing. It comes from being Jewish and raised with some kind of a faith, but also just coming from parents who taught me morality and taught me ethics and taught me the power of showing kindness and love to people. I wouldn't want to write stories or just have a job to make money. And I'm lucky that I can do something I love and get paid for it. But I feel really fortunate that I can tell stories and try to share other people's stories. I think writing biographies, writing really any kind of story is itself an act of empathy, and I'm very spiritual about that part of it.
Thank you for sharing. So I'm thinking about advice, and I'm wondering what advice might you share with parents, or specifically dads?
Wow. I think it's okay to show your emotions, even if those emotions are anger and frustration sometimes. That's hard for me. That's been really hard for me. But I think my dad gave me a great example of that he was, he really couldn't hide his emotions. And I think I'm really lucky for that.
I'm sort of envisioning your dad as like a light in a bushel basket, and he could not prevent the light from coming out from the bushel basket.
I like that.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much for doing these conversations and for the work that you do to help us appreciate fatherhood and the joys and struggles of it. But it's the best job in the world.
I agree. If somebody wants to learn about your books or contact you, what's the best way to do so?
I'll go to my website, jonathaneig.com, and there's an email button on there too. You can get, I think, everything you need there.
Excellent. John, thanks for your time and many insights. As a reminder, John is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. John, thanks again.
Thank you, David. Take care.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.